Welcome back to Mr. Scare. For today's episode, I have a compilation of 7 night driving horror stories from the United States of America. And before I begin, I'd like to thank you for the amazing response on my previous video on parking lot horror stories. So I'll start reading the stories now. And meanwhile, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. About 7 years ago, I was driving across the New Mexico and Colorado border at around 3 a.m. I was supposed to drive another 150 miles, and I knew I didn't have enough fuel. I was looking for a place to stop and refill my fuel tank. I had missed one gas station when I was in a dilemma if I should stop and refill at that moment or find one a few miles further. But after skipping that one, there wasn't a single one visible for over an hour. I was worried, and mainly it was late. I did not want to be in the middle of nowhere when I run out of fuel. Luckily, I happened to reach a town that was probably the smallest and saddest little farm town, and it had only one tiny gas station. Now I hadn't seen another car on the highway for hours, and it was freezing cold outside. I drove to reach the gas station that looked like a food takeaway joint. And honestly, it felt like this town was abandoned like a ghost town. I mean, it was that quiet. Total pin drop silence, apart from my engine. And forget humans, I don't even spot any cars parked anywhere. Frankly speaking, I felt that it was kind of a cool place to explore, except for the unbearing cold weather. Now as I approach the station, I don't see anyone around at all. So I wear an extra jacket and jump out of my truck. I'm pumping away and refilling my truck, feeling like I'm completely alone in this whole damn town, until I notice another car in the shadows, quietly sitting near the back of the building. It was a flashy black lowrider with completely tinted windows. And there were 4 guys leaning against it. And I don't know how to describe those 4 people's outfits and looks. But for me, the simplest way to help you picturize them would be by asking you to visualize a gang of 4 men in a Mexican gangster movie. Yes, I am not exaggerating. And I remember chuckling to myself in slight shock because firstly, they startled the hell out of me. And secondly, they were wearing black shorts, wife-beater tank tops, and the usual knee-high socks. Now do not forget that it was freezing cold out there, and it was the middle of nowhere. Despite that, they looked so damn casual. And without a word, all 4 of them got off the car. They started walking straight towards me, until I could see the full sleeves and face tattoos under the lights of the gas station that I was in. I dropped the gas pump, dashed inside my truck, fired up the motor, and did the quickest 0 to 100 that my beloved truck had ever witnessed. And while I jumped into my truck, I remember them shouting and running toward me. I shut the door and gunned towards the exit. I did not want to be in this town any longer. I sped my way and got to the highway. But not 30 seconds after burning out onto the highway, I noticed headlights swerve out onto my lane and follow me. Little did they know, I beat up looking at a Dodge truck that had the Hemi motor and a couple of cool upgrades. I knew that they never had a chance to catch up with me. I was startled by the noise of a gunshot. I sped as fast as I could, and I'll be honest with you, at one point, I thought I might burn out my engine. But I had to risk it. These crazy men might be wanting to loot or kill me, or sell off my body parts to some black market, and I couldn't risk myself getting caught by them. The road was pretty smooth, and that helped me maintain pace, or for that matter increase our gap too. And after a few miles, I heard another loud gunshot. And their headlights disappeared in my rearview mirror. I kept driving because another trucker friend of mine had told me about a similar incident, where he assumed that he was not being chased anymore, only to learn that they had stealthily crept closer to him with their lights off. Although in my case, I was lucky. I kept driving for the next few hours and eventually got where I was supposed to reach. They were pretty surprised, because I had reached significantly earlier than they had expected. I mean, of course. I didn't think much of it, and even laughed at how badly I outran them, till a cop buddy told me something that sent shivers down my spine. As a cop, he was aware of the Mexican cartels running drugs through that ghost town to avoid the interstate. I was stunned to know that my guess was correct. and it took me a while to grasp the reality that I had pulled myself out of those jaws of death. And from that day onwards, no matter how desperate I am, I do not enter their ghost towns or abandoned places. They are abandoned for a reason, and it is best to leave them that way. So this happened when my young wife and I were moving between cities. We had spent the entire day loading a large 16-foot trailer with all our belongings. It tired us out and we were left exhausted by the end of it, but we did not rest. Mainly because we wanted to begin the drive across the state, just before it got dark. And mind you, this was way back in 1980s. The headlights weren't as strong back then. I had borrowed a large pickup truck to pull the heavy trailer to our destination, so the combination of this truck and the fully loaded trailer was extremely heavy. And because of its heavy weight, it was pretty slow and cumbersome to start and stop the truck. We were traveling along a very desolate stretch of the highway at around midnight. We were driving roughly 60 to 65 miles per hour when I noticed something that looked like a couple of deers walking out into the road ahead of us. And they were like around 200 yards ahead of us. My wife was fast asleep on the seat next to me. I began to slow down a bit because I knew it'll take a while to slow down, and meanwhile, I pressed the horn to scare the animals off the road before we would reach them. Now where we live, this is a fairly common occurrence. These dumb deers randomly show up on the road. Or worse, they jump onto a moving vehicle and shatter the window glass unintentionally. But they are startled by loud noises and horns generally scare them off easily. So I'm not slamming on the brakes in full force, because I expect these deers will move well before we get there. You know, as I said, they usually do that. But for some reason, they stood firm, and that put me in a state of panic. As we got closer, I suddenly realized as these two so-called deers came clearly into the light of our headlights, that these aren't deers. They were two men, and they were trying to stop our truck. Now the road we were driving on was only a 2-lane highway, and one man was standing in the middle of our lane, and the other was standing right in the middle of the opposite lane. By now there was absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to stop this rig, and they weren't leaving me anywhere to go. They had their reasons to expect that I would be eventually stopping, unless I was a psychopath that would run my truck over them with no regrets. But they didn't realize that I couldn't stop. It was beyond my capacity to stop the truck at that speed, and that too within that short, ever-decreasing distance. I stomp on the brake pedal and continue to blare the horn over and over again and as fast as possible, hopefully getting them to move off my path. I'm fighting to keep the truck and trailer from jackknifing, brakes locked up and tires screaming, but these guys are not moving or showing any signs of fear. All this while I'm still going 35 to 40 miles per hour when I had almost reached them. The only thing that I could do at that point was to try and thread through the needle-like gap between them. So I center the truck in the middle of the roadway and hope that neither of them tries to close that small window. At the very last second, the guy who's standing in the middle of our lane jumps out of the way. He was so close that I was seriously worried our big rearview mirror might hit him in the head. I missed hitting him by mere inches. This all happened in a span of about 5 to 10 seconds. There was no car anywhere on the road, and we were way out in the middle of nowhere, and it was pretty obvious, based on their behavior, that these two guys were up to something potentially nefarious. I didn't stop, and I didn't even bother to. I had already come way too damn close to killing these guys. My heart was literally in my throat, and it was pounding so hard that I was having trouble breathing for the next few minutes. I didn't even realize until afterward that when I'd slammed on the brakes, my wife had slid off the seat and onto the floor of the truck. Just FYI, seatbelts were not mandatory back in those days. She groggily gets up off the floor and asks me,
"What the hell just happened?"
She had missed the events that had unfolded merely a minute ago. And I'm thankful that she didn't, because it would have scarred her for life. It scared the shit out of me. And I've never come so close to killing someone in my life, and I truly hope I never do again. Oh, and by the way, we reached there safely. And we unpacked a day later. We settled well over there and got accustomed within a week itself. I made friends with the local sheriff as he was my neighbor too. And over a drink, I told him about this entire incident from that night. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that I should have had run my truck over those criminals. Because good people stop their cars so as to save the lives of these goons, they end up getting looted or worse, murdered. And sometimes they even target cop cars, where they pretend to be lost and in need of help. Then the moment they find the officer is not alert, they attack and steal whatever they can. And at night, it is always difficult to make out and remember the faces. And he mentioned that I could always claim that I had to run over them for my own safety, which was more than justified in the eyes of the law. Henceforth, I have made it a point that if I ever encounter such goons, I would realize my lifelong dream of playing GTA with my real car. But jokes apart, if that's what it takes to save my family and myself, I would do it without any regrets. What about you? Before I begin, I'll provide a bit of background. I'm a truck driver, and unlike the usual long-distance drives, I was specifically doing shuttle runs for a factory in my city. I run loaded trailers from the factory downtown to a warehouse that is situated around 20 miles away. That warehouse is where I drop my loaded trailer, exchange it for an empty one, and take it straight back to the factory where I started my journey. I run this route like 8 to 10 times a night every day. I'm told that it's a diamond in the rough as far as trucking jobs go. Anyway, my route has me cross this rather precarious highway bridge on each return trip. The bridge is only 2 lanes wide, with no shoulder. The speed limit on the highway is 70 miles an hour, but this bridge has a steep drop and a sharp curve down to surface level, so the recommended speed to take this curve is 45. A few months ago, around 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, I was in the process of rounding this curve when a car was blocking the bridge, and I nearly plowed right into it. The car didn't lose control or smash into anything, there weren't any tire tracks on the pavement, and the car didn't have any damage. The car was a brand new Mercedes SUV with dealer tags, so it probably wasn't broken down. And nobody was in the car. Whoever was driving must have just decided to come to a complete stop in the middle of this practically blind corner, get out of his car, and walk away. The car couldn't have been there for longer than 30 minutes or so, because it wasn't there when I drove past that bridge in the other direction. I didn't see anyone walking along the highway too. I have no idea what was going on, and I called the cops to get that car, and I never heard anything about it that night. A week later, another driver told me about what he had heard. Apparently, a man had committed suicide on the bridge that night. He jumped down that bridge while he was on his duty. The reason was unknown, but the body was found a day later. It gave me chills knowing that had he been there 30 minutes earlier, I might have had the opportunity to save his life. Rest in peace. About 15 years ago, my sister and I were driving on our way home. It was quite late at night, and the road was deserted at that hour. The stretch of that road is around 3 miles, and it is surrounded by trees on both sides. We were speaking about random stuff on the way, and suddenly we could both see something on the road up ahead. It wasn't still. It was moving at a constant pace with our car, but it wasn't running and it looked weird. So I asked her what it was, and my sister said she too didn't have a clue. And I don't know how to describe it, but it looked like a black garbage bag. My sister too said that it really looked like a bag flying on the road, flapping along the wind to stay afloat. I was curious, so I sped up a bit and tried to catch up with it. Now you wouldn't believe it, but as we approached, it completely changed its shape. It went from being quite flat and small to morphing into a fully grown man on a bike. He was just there in the middle of the road, riding his bike. We were dumbstruck by what we had just seen. And all of it happened within moments. Maybe 10 seconds. I caught up alongside him and asked if he was okay. He nodded but didn't speak anything, and then he drove off at an unmatchable speed. The most peculiar part is that it made no noise. I mean, generally, a motorcycle would get noisier after speeding up, but this one did not. And this was like in the early 2000s, so today's technology did not exist. To this day, we still talk about it because it was the strangest, creepiest thing ever, and we both still can't explain what we saw. My bet is that it was some sort of secret government tech, while my sister believes that it was an alien that we saw. When I mentioned it to my friends and family, we joked that it must be some sort of secret teleportation technology. I was around 20, and I was driving home from my boyfriend's house. It was a familiar route, so I wasn't super cautious or worried per se. I stopped at a red light on the very edge of town. I remember all of the city lights were behind me, while the cornfields and shelter belts were ahead of me. Now, because it was like around 3, and that too in the middle of the night, I was the only one sitting at the red light. It was a pleasant night, and I had had a great time meeting his parents. While reminiscing about those moments, I saw something moving in my peripheral vision. Now, because of my location, I thought it was going to be a deer. But deers don't creep in towards you. They'll either jump in or out randomly. This one seemed like slowly creeping in on me, like a predator. I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with a man who was maybe in his 50s. I was relieved, as I'm paranoid about bobcats already. But I wondered, why was he creeping towards my car? When he noticed that I saw him, he froze, and it was then that I noticed he had a tire iron. I ran the red light and sped out of there. I called my boyfriend and told him about it. He took his car, and his elder brother hid in the back seat. But they didn't find him there. In 10 minutes, he was gone without a trace. Almost about 3 years ago, my brother and I were making a cross-country journey, and we were planning on stopping off in Arizona to meet some friends. As soon as we entered Arizona, there were highway notices everywhere that there was an escaped convict. Now it was about 2 a.m. by the time we got there, so we were already in a bit of a strange mood. There was something about the entire drive through the desert that felt super eerie. And it was strange to a point that one of us even mentioned it, and we started joking about the spooky claims people make while traveling through the area. Like the existence of aliens that abduct unwary travelers, skinwalkers chasing you down, and ghosts that haunt drivers. While we were having this conversation, this crazy-looking animal ran across the road right in front of us. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it looked too wolf-like to be a deer. But it moved like a deer and was too lanky to be a coyote. And it even had a long tail like that of a cougar. Moreover, it was big. I slammed on my brakes, and it ran off into the brush on the side. We both just started screaming and then laughing. We have no clue what it was. At first, I thought that it must be a cougar with mange. But the more I thought about it, the less sure I was of what it was that we saw. It also didn't make any noise like a growl or a scream out of shock. My house is on a back road in the country, and so whenever I need to head to town, I have to travel through this small Amish settlement. And I almost always end up having to pass by an Amish carriage. It's a common occurrence, and they're usually friendly and pull as much to the side as they can so as to let cars pass them by. But this one time I was behind an Amish carriage, it was going unbelievably slow. So I came up behind them, checked to make sure it was clear, and passed by. And I very vividly remember looking at them as I passed in my rear view, looking ahead to the road, and then looking back in my rear view to see that nothing was there. No horse, no carriage, and no human. And mind you, there were no roads to turn on, nor hills to cut off my sight. 1 second they were there, and the very next they just weren't. And I have never had a ghost-like experience before. Nor have anyone heard about such paranormal experiences in the village. I wasn't drunk, and I still have no explanation. I have heard about phantom trucks and such phenomena. But phantom horses? That's a new thing for me. Thank you so much for listening to these stories, and moreover, for making my previous video get over 1,000 views within 48 hours. Also, our horror community has grown quickly because of it, and now we are less than 50 subscribers away from making it to 2,000 subs. So share this video to as many as you can, and let's grow our horror community.